Atlantic Division preview predictions. Just going to be me kind of rambling on about my thoughts, what I think before the season starts. Going to basically be audio only. There'll be a couple visuals, but throw it on 1.5 speed, put in your pocket, go for a walk, go for a run, jerk off, do whatever you want to do. Let me know what you think. Let's jump right into it. We're going to start off here with the Montreal Canadiens in 8th place in the Atlantic. Same place they finished last season. Didn't do a ton of this roster. They lose a couple depth guys in Drouin and Hoffman. They traded Dadonov at the deadline last year. They lose Joel Edmondson as well in the offseason. But I like their forward group. I think this team was ravaged by injuries last year. You look at it. Monahan only played 25 games. Gallagher played 37. Mike Matheson on the back end played 48. Caulfield, 46. David Savard missed some games. Dvorak missed some games. Anderson missed some games. So this team was really banged up last year. And again, I don't think they make the playoffs, but I like their forward group. You know what you're getting from Cole Caulfield. He has the potential to be a 40, maybe even 50 goal guy in the NHL. Nick Suzuki was their only player to play every game last year. Him and Kovacevic were the only two that played more than 70. So again, just adding to that whole injury narrative from last year. I like what Josh Anderson brings to the table. He's a prick to play against. Kirby Dach was a really great story last year. They bring him over from Chicago. He struggled there, but he really found his footing last season. Ended up having 14 goals, 38 points in 58 games. I think they're hoping to have a similar effect with Alex Newhook, who was another former first-round pick. Playing some decent hockey in Colorado. Obviously won a cup there, but seemed to kind of stall out and didn't quite fit the team's window. I think the Canadiens can definitely get some really good hockey out of the kid. I really like his game dating back to his days in college. He was a beast at Boston College. I really loved watching him. I think he has a real chance to be a 20-25 goal player this year. I like his shot. I think it's pretty underrated. While he was given a decent chance in Colorado to exceed, I feel like his leash wasn't as long as it will likely be in kind of a rebuilding team like Montreal. The rest of the forward core, you have Slavkovsky. Interesting to see where he fits in this year. He obviously has a really big frame, and I think he's kind of one of those low ceiling, high floor prospects. Probably not what you want from a first overall pick. But he's still so young. People, trying to take a victory lap over that pick. Saying he's a bust. That's crazy. I'm excited to see how he turns out this year. Bring in Tanner Pearson. He had that whole injury fiasco last year with the Canucks. That was a mess. He's going to be a solid third liner for them. Monahan, as I said, missed a lot of games last year, but he played pretty well when he was healthy. 17 points in 25 games. Brendan Gallagher, another guy who missed a lot of time. Not the player he used to be. When you play like that, definitely takes a toll on your body, but he'll be a fine skater for them. Jake Evans, I'm a big fan of his game. Really good fourth line center. Harvey Pinard was great last year in a small sample size. Is he going to score at the same pace as he was last year? No, not a chance. He had 24 shooting percentage, 14 goals in 34 games, but he has a chance to be a really nice piece for that team. Where this team really falls flat is its defense and its goaltending. I do think Michael Matheson is one of the more underrated defensemen in the entire league. He was great last year, especially in a pretty poor system. He had 34 points plus 7 in 48 games, again on a bad team. He was kind of an all situations guy. He's playing close to 25 minutes a game. He's, really developed into a top pairing defenseman, which is going to be great for the Canadiens. I'm curious to see if maybe they trade him this year, because again, like I said, I don't see this team making the playoffs. The rest of the defense, it's young. You have Caden Gooley, you have Kovacevic, you have Jordan Harris. I like his game. And then you got Wi-Fi on the back end there, who's just a bitch to play against. He's going to hit anything that moves. He's not going to give you a whole lot more than that. But and then you also have David Savard, who at this point in his career is probably better off for a bottom pair role. And then in net, you have, Jake Allen and Sam Montembeault. Neither were very good last year, showed some signs. Allen's obviously had a pretty successful NHL career. Interesting to see if Caden Primo gets any sort of time with the team. But yeah, I have this team 8th in the Atlantic. I think they're going to be pretty feisty, though. They're going to be a fun team to watch. Better than last year. So before I reveal the next team in the Atlantic, I do want to say that I think the next 4 or 5 teams are going to be pretty exchangeable over the entire season. I think every team in the Atlantic, aside from the Canadiens, has a real shot to make the playoffs. There's just a ton of parity in the East and in the Atlantic specifically. And I really wanted to put this team higher. I just couldn't do it because I feel like they're just a slightly lesser version of a couple of the teams I have ahead of them. So up next, we have the Detroit Red Wings. Red Wings had a pretty decent year last year. They were kind of feisty. They obviously sold at the deadline. No more Tyler Bertuzzi, no more Hronek. Just going to be a pretty big loss for the team in my eyes. But they had a super active offseason. They bring in Alex DeBrincat. They bring in JT Compher. Daniel Sprong signs. Bring in Clem Costin, Christian Fischer. Trade for Jeff Petrie. Sign Shane Gostisbehere. They sign Justin Holl. Reimer's going to be their backup goaltender. So a lot of moving parts with this team. And I think this team's forward core is really deep. Obviously, Dylan Larkin is a first-line center in every sense of the game. Just a dynamic player. He's so fast, unbelievable. Just a great player to watch. Now you add Alex DeBrincat, you add a 40-goal scorer to that team. That's going to help. David Perron has been Mr. Consistency over the past, 5-6 seasons. He's a shoo-in to get, 20 goals and be in the 50 to 60 point range. I love that signing last year. They lose Kubalik as well. Forgot to mention that. He had 20 goals last year, but obviously they're bringing in DeBrincat. JT Compher looks like he's going to be their second-line center. Him and Andrew Kopp play a fairly similar game, definitely in terms of roles. Both defensively responsible, are going to be good for, 10, 15, 20 goals, 40, 50 points. Can play center, can play wing. I like both their games. Robbie Fabry is going to be healthy this year. His injury history has been crazy, but last year he was pretty good when he was healthy, 16 points in 28 games. He's going to be a nice kind of middle six winger. With a nice scoring touch. Lucas Raymond. It's going to be interesting to see where his game goes. I would have liked to see a little more development in his game. Still had a solid year, not taking anything away from him. I definitely expect him to take a tangible step in the right direction this year. I'm thinking 25 goals, 60 points, and kind of a more well-rounded player. Filling out the rest of the team, they bring in Daniel Sprong, who was really great in a pretty minimal role last year in Seattle. He knows how to score. That's simple as that. Michael Rasmussen was pretty good last year. He's a big body. Curious to see how he does. And then they have some, well-abled bodies, Clem Costin and Joe Veleno, Christian Fischer, all relatively young. I guess at this point, Fischer's not that young. But I really like how this forward core kind of fills out. Their defense is improved as well. Moritz Seider is a stud, obviously. Kind of another guy like Raymond where I would have liked to see a little more last year. He really came into his own when he was paired with Jake Wallman, who was a great story last year. He's just a really, really sound defenseman. He's kind of in that complementary first pairing role, like your Ryan Lindgrens, Devin Tays a few years ago. Now he's developed into a stud. So maybe that's not a great example. But the type of guy you can put with your number one defenseman, and he's going to just give you some really good hockey, shift in and shift out. They bring in Jeff Petrie, who I like. He was pretty solid with the Penguins last year. Obviously, he had no place on that team. With them bringing in Erik Karlsson, Shane Gostisbehere had a nice resurgent year last year. I was really impressed with his play in Arizona. And then coming over to Carolina, he was pretty good as well. Justin Holl, they bring in from Toronto, the whipping boy. I don't think he's as bad as all of Toronto thinks. Just don't play him in a top four role. He can give you some decent hockey. They have Alimata there. They have Ben Sherratt there. So they have a lot of pieces on that back end. I'm kind of too many, in my opinion. I don't know who's going to start on riding the pine for them. I would assume Alimata, but in my eyes, should probably be Ben Sherratt. And then in goal, Ville Husso and James Reimer, just not a very good tandem. Husso had a pretty awful end to the season. I want to say he gave up 5 to 6 goals in 6 of his last 12 starts. So he needs to be better. He needs to find some of that magic he had in St. Louis. So I think the success of this team really banks on their goaltending. If they get some solid goaltending, and I'm not even saying, top 10, if they get top 15, top 20 goaltending, I think this team has a real chance to make the playoffs because of the depth they have at forward and their defensive core that is filled out pretty nicely this year. Might be kind of a hot take up next. Definitely going to ruffle some feathers of this team's fans, but I have your defending Eastern Conference champion Florida Panthers up next in the Atlantic. Listen, this all stems from the back end and the injuries they have to start the year. It looks like Brendan Montour is probably going to miss about 2 months with this torn labrum injury. Obviously, could missing more time, missing less time. But this guy was a stud for them last year. Big reason why they got so far in the playoffs. And in the regular season, he had 16 goals, 73 points on the back end. That is wildly impressive. This guy is just really, really good. He's great at joining the rush. Just super smart player. I love his game. But he's going to miss a good chunk of time, and so is Aaron Ekblad, who had a shoulder injury and a shoulder surgery this offseason. He's also going to miss about 2 months, and he didn't have a great year to his standards last year, but 2 years ago he was excellent. So missing those 2 guys for a good chunk of the season, and also the departure of Radko Gudas, their right side of defense is going to be pretty awful for the first part of the year. I think they did a decent job in finding some pieces to kind of plug in there. It'll be interesting to see how Oliver Ekman-Larsson kind of rebounds. He was pretty bad last year in Vancouver. Obviously, his pedigree in his prime was a great puck-moving defenseman, great shot, great at getting pucks through. It'll be interesting to see how he fares. They bring back Dmitry Kulikov, who is fine in my eyes. He's Gudas, but not as good. Physical body. They bring in a guy, Uvis Balinskis, if that's how you pronounce it. I don't know much about him. Haven't seen anything from him on ice. All I know is that he played in the Czech League last year for the past few years. He's in the KHL previously. He's played for Team Latvia in international competition, World Cup, Olympics. And he's fared pretty well. I think he'll be a decent little player for them on the back end. Bring in Nico Mikkola, who's fine. They bring in Mike Riley, who I've always kind of liked his game. Didn't have a role with the Bruins last year because of salary and kind of redundancy with him in Grzelcyk's game. They also have Josh Maher back there. But outside of Gustav Forsling, I do have to say, I think Gustav Forsling is the most underrated defenseman in the entire NHL. I really do. I think he is an absolute stud on that back end. I think he is not a number one defenseman, but a top pairing defenseman. He had a great year last year. He's been just really good. Came out of nowhere a couple years ago. Couldn't find ice time in Chicago for a while, and now he's an absolute stud in Florida. And then, as I said, that back end pairing with Bobrovsky, who was great in their run last year again, but he hasn't shown much in the regular season recently. He lost the job to Alex Lyon last year, who's not there anymore. Bringing Anthony Stolars to back up. Spencer Knight looks like he's starting the AHL. Hope everything goes well with him. I know he was having some issues last year, but after kind of crapping on this team for a while, I have to give them credit where credit is due. This is one of the most dynamic forward cores in the entire NHL. Matthew Tkachuk is a top 3 winger, top 1 winger, top 5 winger in the entire NHL. He just does everything right. 109 points last year, 40 tucks. Obviously, just a guy you don't want to see in front of the net, in the corners. Alexander Barkov, who people have to stop saying he's underrated. He's excellent, but I mean, how long can we call this guy underrated? 78 points in 68 games last year, and he's great in his own end as well. Carter Verhaeghe's the guy who kind of came out of nowhere a few years ago, and he's a stud. He had 42 goals last year. He also broke my heart in the playoffs as a Bruins fan. Sam Reinhart had a nice year last year, 30 goals, 67 points. I like Louis Sterainen's game. He's a pretty solid two-way forward. Same goes for Lundell. He's young. He still has room to grow. Looks like Sam Bennett's going to be out to start the year. That's another guy who, he missed some time last year. That hurt them. He was great in the playoffs. They bring in Evan Rodriguez, who is kind of a Swiss Army knife type player. He's had some real success in Colorado and Pittsburgh over the past couple of years. I like his game. I think he can be a nice complementary piece in likely in that top six. Mackie Samoskevich, very curious to see how he does. He made the team. Great college career at Michigan, and now he has a chance to prove himself. He's going to be playing with some talented players in that top 9 to start the year. Looks like he's playing with Lundell and Reinhart on the third line to start, so I think he's going to have some real success this season. And then rounding out their forward core, Lomberg, who's just a pest. They bring in Kevin Stenlund and Lorenz, who are fine players. But yeah, I just think the back end and the goaltending with all the injuries, it's not going to be enough for a team that snuck into the playoffs last year. They got in by a point. So, yeah, I think they're going to have to outscore their problems, which is going to be a tall task to do, especially to start the year. Next up, maybe another hot take, but I have the Tampa Bay Lightning. I have them missing the playoffs. This team has just been losing piece after piece after piece over the years. Obviously, they were unbelievable wagon for years and years, but even last year they were in the bottom half of expected goals against, and they don't have Vasilevsky to bail them out of those problems to start the year. He's going to be out, I think, a minimum of 2 months. You look at the back end, you obviously have Hedman and Sergachev, who are both elite. Sergachev has outperformed my expectations for him, just leaps and bounds. I like Eric Cernak's game. He's a good defensive guy, a super physical player, just a fan of his game. And the rest of their defense is fine. They have Nick Perbix, who's decent. They have Darren Radish, who's fine. They bring in Calvin DeHaan. They have Zach Bogosian, who I think they just sent down. But the rest of that D-core outside of those top 2 guys is not all that impressive. Then you move up to their forward core. Their top line, Stamkos, Point, and Kucherov, if they even start the season like that, is probably the best first line in the NHL. You can probably make the case for Dallas with their top line, but, untouchable first line. I think they should split them up because they've just been bleeding talent up front. They lose Palat last year, and now they lose Killorn, who scored 30 goals for them last year. 27, actually, but more or less. They lose Ross Colton, who was a really nice piece for them on their third line, and they don't do a whole lot to replace them. Sheary's a fine replacement. He's kind of good for 15 goals as a complimentary piece in your top 9. They have a full year of Michael Eyssimont, who is another decent player. I know analytics are a big fan of him. He's just pretty good in his own zone, in my opinion. Tanner Jeannot they have for a full year. That was an awful trade. I think everyone knew that off the rip, trading for a guy who, big physical player, but he's not a great skater, and he just kind of capitalized on a high shooting percentage his rookie year. Luke Glendening, all defense guy, fourth line center, fine. Tyler Mott, fine, kind of energy guy. And then just kind of the rest of that top 6. I love Brendan Hagel's game. I thought that was a great trade, contrary to the Jeannot trade. That's worth it. When you get a guy who, has the potential to score 30 goals. He scored 30 last year. He was great with the Blackhawks before that. On a minuscule cap number and, this flat cap world especially, it's absolutely worth giving up those 2 first-round picks. So he's been great. Anthony Cirelli, I think on a great team, is your third-line center. I'm a fan of his game. Super fast, great in his own zone, decent with the puck. I just think this team's going to struggle to score outside of their top-tier guys. And then when you have kind of a faulty defensive core outside of your top 2 guys without a real number 1 goalie, without a stud goalie, without a top 5 goalie, top 3 goalie in the league for a good chunk of the season, I think this team kind of has disappointment written all over it. Would it shock me if they made the playoffs? No, not at all. As I said, these few teams are kind of all in limbo. Wouldn't surprise me if any of them made it. Wouldn't surprise me if any of them missed it. But yeah, I have the Lightning right here. Up next, we have the Ottawa Senators. This team's going to be good this year. I think they have a dynamic forward core. I think their defense has improved a lot, and they have a decent little tandem in net now. Starting off with their forward core, one of the better first lines in the entire NHL, Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle, and Claude Giroux. Rod the Bod, whatever. He still has it. He scored 35 goals last year, 79 points. He still looks as dynamic as ever, just an unbelievably smart player. Brady Tkachuk had a great year last year as well. He's a pest to play against, gets in the dirty areas. He was above a point per game last year, 35 tucks as well. And then that line is headlined by Tim Stützle, who looks to be the next truly great dynamic center in the league. 39 goals, 51 assists, good for 90 points last year. He is an absolute freak. Like he truly is. I think he's probably right outside of the top 10, maybe he's top 15 centers in the league, because I think his two-way game has another level to get to. Not to say he won't get there, especially this year. He's 21 years old. Tkachuk is 23. Both those guys have plenty of room to grow. But yeah, just an unbelievable first line. Second line, it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. Josh Norris is obviously going to be hurt to start the year. He missed basically the entire season last year. He played 8 games. Season before that, he had 35 goals in 66 games. So Josh Norris is someone who, when healthy, is going to be a massive boost to this team. And, in missing last year, Shane Pinto was able to step up and have a pretty good rookie year. He had 20 goals on the season, but he has been, in a contract dispute with the team. They have no cap space. Pinto doesn't want to be getting paid league minimum, or pretty close to it. I think that's fair on his end, but he's going to be missing for the foreseeable future as well. Interesting to see how that all shakes out if he gets traded. If a guy like Matthew Joseph gets traded, who, I like his game, speedy player, but kind of a bottom 6 guy. He's kind of slated to fill in at the top 6 in his absence. Ridley Greig is a player who I am pretty fond of. He played a handful of games last year, 20 games, 9 points in those 20 games, and he just had a really successful juniors career. He was great in the World Juniors a couple of years ago. Former first-round pick. I think he's going to be able to fill in well. You obviously have Drake Batherson, who has really developed into just kind of a wizard with the puck. He's a really good passer, great vision. 62 points last year. Kind of rounding out their core. Obviously, they lose Alex DeBrincat, who was supposed to be a big ad for them last year. Didn't really pan out. Didn't have a bad season by any means. 27 goals, 66 points. But to kind of counteract that subtraction, they bring in Tarasenko in kind of an all-offensive role. He's obviously not the player he used to be. I can definitely see him having success. I think if he ends up kind of replicating DeBrincat's season, 25, 30 goals, 60 points, I think they're going to be super fine with that. Also coming along in the DeBrincat deal is Dominik Kubalik, who is, a fine third-line player. 20-something goals last year. He's a good little player. And the rest of their, bottom 6 is fine. Parker Kelly, Kastelik, who is a big physical player. But the back end is one that I'm a fan of. I don't think it's elite by any means, but definitely improving year after year. They bring in Jacob Chikrin last year, which I thought was a great move. He just needs to stay healthy. He's, just a great defenseman. He can play both sides. He's going to score a good amount of goals on the back end. Not a lot of defensemen can do what he does. Looks like he's going to be paired with Thomas Chabot to start the year. I'm curious to see if Chabot has another level to his game. He's obviously a very solid defenseman, good with the puck. I just don't know if he's hit his ceiling yet. He's going to be 27 to start the year. Not old by any means, but I'm curious to see if he can hit another level to his game. He's obviously still a very good defenseman in his own right. Jake Sanderson had a super under-the-radar rookie year last year. I'm a fan of his game. He's a good skater, kind of well-rounded player. Artem Zub, I'm a big fan of as well. He's kind of just a rock-solid guy. Eric Branstrom finally took some steps last year. I was definitely a fan of his game, and where that took him, Hamonic is kind of meh at this point in his career. But in net, big changes for this team. Cam Talbot out the door. He was pretty bad last year. Below average goaltender. Anton Forsberg was hurt last year. When he played, he wasn't great. But 2 years ago, he had a really solid season. I think when healthy, him and Jonas Korpisalo, who they bring in from Columbus and LA last year, he was great down the stretch for the Kings and was pretty decent in the playoffs. Obviously not the answer, but I think him and Forsberg can create a pretty good tandem, and if they can get kind of top 15 production out of those guys, they're going to be able to score some goals. They have kind of offense generating from all throughout their lineup. I think this team is going to make it back into the playoffs this year. And again, really important for Norris to get healthy and Pinto to get that contract figured out. If they both end up missing more time than expected, that's, two key centers, two key top 9 players in your lineup that, missing out on them could be a big hit. But regardless, good team. I think the Sens are back in the playoffs. Up next, Buffalo Sabres. After, I don't know exactly how many years, but after a very, very long wait, I have the Buffalo Sabres back in the playoffs. They had a really good year last year. They missed the playoffs by a single point, and I like what they did with their roster. Not too many moves, but the biggest thing for me is going to be their improvements in net. I think Devin Levi has a chance to be a really good goaltender in this league, and he just kind of needs to be okay this year. Their goaltending last year was not good. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen was pretty bad. Eric Comrie was not good either. Craig Anderson was decent. He's no longer there. But I think if Devin Levi can come in, put up 9-10 save percentage, give up, really less than 3 goals a game, because this Buffalo offense is simply dynamic, I think this team can really do some damage in the regular season. Their first line is among the best in the entire league. Obviously, you have Tage Thompson, who is a 50-goal caliber guy. He had 47 last year. Jeff Skinner, who, what a wild, kind of career for Skinner. He was obviously great to start in Carolina, then fizzled out, then came to Buffalo and tore it up, got a big contract. Then he stunk for a couple years, and now he is kind of a top-line player again. He was a point per game last year. And then to the right of those two is Alex Tuch, who, for my money, is probably the most underrated winger in the league. He had 79 points in 74 games last year. He does everything right. He's great in his own zone. He's a big body. I don't think I have enough good things to say about Alex Tuch. Great in the locker room as well. Kind of moving out through their forward core, Dylan Cousins had a great year last year. He's 21 years old. He had 68 points last year. I think he could be a point per game guy. Casey Middlestat's another player who finally came into his own last year. He, was finally showing those signs of what made him so good in college and why he was such a high pick. He had 44 apples in 82 games, added 15 goals to that as well. You got Victor Olofsson, who you kind of know what you're getting. Great shot. Going to be a really nice option to have on that power play. Not a whole lot else to his game. You have JJ Peterka, who just wicked fast. I think he has a real chance to be a super under the radar kind of 25 goal guy this year. Big fan of his game. Love to see Zach Benson make the team this year. He's proving to be, it's very early, and I shouldn't even be saying this because it's the same year he got drafted, but maybe the best value pick in the draft. They drafted him 13th overall, and, I think there's a case to be said at this point, or, maybe he should have gone top 5. Absolutely love his game. He's dynamic. I hope he gets more than the 9-game tryout, but it'll be interesting to see how that shakes up. They're bringing Jordan Greenaway last year, who, is just a solid forward. He's great in his own end, good at suppressing the opposition's offense, which they kind of need to offset some of their kind of offensive-only guys. Defensively, this forward group might be the worst in the NHL, but obviously they can outscore their problems in that respect. I do think they have to kind of grow into better overall players this year, and I think they will. They have Gergensons, who's a nice fourth-line player, Okposo, who's really found his role on this team as their captain and as a fourth-line player. Got Peyton Krebs as well, who has kind of settled into his fourth-line role. I'd like to see him get some more ice time. I don't know where that's going to come. Maybe if Benson gets sent down after the 9 games, Krebs gets elevated into another role, but he's been pretty good in his role as of now. On the back end, Rasmus Dahlin is an absolute stud. Can't really say anything else about him. He is a top 10, 15 defenseman in the NHL. He was almost a point per game last year. He just got paid. Another guy that just got paid, Owen Power. Great rookie year last year. Super well-rounded player. I don't think he's going to be the point scorer that a guy like Dahlin is, but a top 4 defenseman now, and I think he's going to be a top pairing defenseman sooner rather than later. Mattias Samuelsson, who was Rasmus Dahlin's partner for the majority of last season. I'm a big fan of his game. I think he's underrated. He's kind of another guy I mentioned, like Jake Wallman before. I think Wallman's a bit better of a skater, but Samuelson's just really sound in his own end and kind of allows Dahlin to activate into the offense and really thrive in his role. They signed Eric Johnson and Connor Clifton in the offseason, which are fine. Those are bottom pairing guys. I don't think they should expect the world from them. But I always like Clifton's game in Boston. Good skater, physical, especially for his stature. Eric Johnson, just a solid vet. They got Henry Jokiharju back there as well. But overall, great forward core. This team is so young from the back end, their goaltending, their forward core. I think this team is a playoff team if Devin Levi can have a decent season. It'll be interesting to see how he does with the increased workload, obviously, but I'm a big fan of this team going forward. When are people going to learn about this team? Last year, the hot pick, top to bottom, was, Bruins. They're old. They're going to miss the playoffs. Scrappy Senators, scrappy yada, yada, yada. Yeah, they shove that up all your asses, and they become the best regular season team of all time. And this team is still really, really good. I think their holes are far less egregious than the other teams in the Atlantic, aside from, obviously, the team I have number 1, the Maple Leafs. But I don't get why people think this team isn't going to be all that good. I know they're going to miss Bergeron. I know they're going to miss Krejci. Hall's going to be a big loss. But outside of that, obviously don't have Bertuzzi or Orlov, who are both great for them. But the team was well on their way to winning the President's Trophy and potentially beating the record before getting those guys. They have a 60-goal scorer in David Pastrnak. They have Brad Marchand, who is still a top 10 winger in the league. And with that new captaincy, taking it over from his best friend, you think he's not going to be playing with a chip on his shoulder? The whole team will, for sure, coming off of the embarrassing round 1 last year. Looks like Pavel Zacha is going to be the number 1 center, and obviously not a great number 1 center, but he really came into his own last year. I'm a big fan of his game. He's going to have ample opportunity to succeed. With Pastrnak to the right of him, he's going to take over that Bergeron bumper position on the power play. They pick up JVR in the offseason, who was pretty good last year. He's going to give you 20 goals a year and just kind of be a big body to have in your top 9. Charlie Coyle is just consistently one of the best third-line centers in the NHL, and I know he's going to be playing second-line center this year, most likely. But he's just a very well-rounded player. I think he is absolutely capable of playing in on a second line. He had a great year last year in a mostly defensive role, 45 points, plus 29. He's great in his own zone. Went to a different skating coach this summer, I saw, so we'll see how that affects his game. He is so hard to get off the puck. You got Jake DeBrusk as well, who had a career year last year, and he missed about 20 games, 27 goals, 50 points playing on that first line with Marchand and Bergeron. He has developed into a great top 6 player. He's very good in his own zone, great with the puck. I'm a big fan of everything he brings. Trent Frederick, another guy, career year last year. 17 goals, all even strength. He's a big body, good defensively, well-rounded player. They bring in Morgan Geekie from Seattle, who had some really good 5-on-5 metrics. I think his points per 60 minutes was among the best in the NHL last year. So interesting to see how he does in an increased role. Matthew Patra. Oh, baby, I'm excited to watch this kid play. He was great in the preseason. He earned his right to be on this team. And from everything I've seen, he should absolutely be on this team for more than the 9-game tryout that he's likely going to get. Curious to see what Bruins management ends up doing, but his puck smarts, his skating, he has a lot of tenacity. When he does lose the puck, he's right after. He doesn't sulk. He's got a great mindset. I hope he's on the team for the entire year. They also bring back Luch. Who's to say Luch doesn't come into this year with a little extra fire? He obviously loves Boston. You can just see all of his interviews in the offseason. It's going to be great to cheer that name again. Jonathan Beecher makes the team. I'm a big fan of his game. North-south, super fast, big body, big fan of his. I think him, Lauck, and Luch each has a real opportunity to be a fast, big body, heavy fourth line. And now you move to the strength of this team. Is there another team in the NHL that has a top 5 goalie tandem and a top 5 defensive core? No, there's not. This team gave up 177 goals last year. That is a shade over 2 goals a game. Almost 40 goals less than the second best team in that regard, the Hurricanes, who, they had a great year last year. They're a great team. And I see people discounting what Linus Ullmark did last year, like it's never going to happen again. Yeah, there's going to be some regression naturally. He's not going to put up a 9.38 and an 8.19 goals allowed average again, but he's a very good goaltender. He's always been a good goaltender. Even with those absolute dog shit Sabres teams, he was always a bright spot. And then his backup, to say he's a backup is doing a disservice to him. Jeremy Swayman, his 1B, had a great year last year as well, and I think he still has a lot of time to grow. He's 25 years old. Goaltenders usually don't come into their own until they're 26, 27. So I'm expecting a big year from that tandem. Their back end, as I said, it's excellent. Charlie McAvoy is a top 5 defenseman in the NHL. Hampus Lindholm, under the radar, I guess, last year, but he finished, top 3, top 5 in Norris Trophy voting. He had an excellent year. Brandon Carlos, one of the best defensemen in the league in his own zone. He just so good at suppressing chances. You got Matt Grzelcyk, who's, an analytical darling. He gets way too much hate from this fan base. It's crazy. He's just great with the puck. He's a really good skater, smart decisions. You got Derek Forbert on that bottom pair, fine, whatever. They bring in Kevin Shattenkirk, who I think has a chance to be a better decision maker than Connor Clifton. You're obviously not going to get the same physical play, but I think he'll fit in well, especially on that power play as kind of a veteran guy. So, stop sleeping on the Bruins again, guys. They're making the playoffs. They're a great team. I'm excited to watch them. All right, Maple Leafs. I think they're going to win the President's Trophy this year. I'll just start it with that. I think this team on paper is just going to be absolutely unbelievable. You have Austin Matthews, who's coming off of a down year to his standards, and he had 40 goals. I think he wins the Rocket Richard this year. Mitch Marner is unbelievable. He weirdly gets some, flack from this fan base, whatever. You guys are losers. Only half kidding. Willie Nylander, another guy, great player. He had 40 goals last year. You got John Tavares, who's still a point-per-game player, still great. You lose Michael Bunting, who was really good last year. 23 goals, 49 points, just solid in all facets of the game. But they replace him with Michael Bunting, but better, in Tyler Bertuzzi, who was excellent for the Bruins down the stretch and in the playoffs. He's a prick. That's all I can say about him. I wish the Bruins re-signed him. They're bringing Max Domi, who's fine. I think he's a little overrated at this point in his career. Not good in his own zone at all, but can certainly put up points. They have a full season for Matthew Nyes, who I am a big fan of. Very interested to see how he does. Fraser Minton makes the team, which was a bit of a surprise for me, but he's got a lot of talent. I've always been a fan of Cal Yarncrocs' game, just kind of Mr. Consistency, good two-way player, 15, 20 goals year in and year out. They bring in Revo, who, I think his aura and his off-the-ice impact's going to really help this team. I know as an analytics guy, I don't think that quantifies what Reeves brings to a team. David Camp, good fourth-line center, kind of energy, defensive, good face-off guy, whatever. Their back end is underrated, in my opinion. Morgan Riley was banged up a little bit last year. He's still a really good defenseman. TJ Brody has kind of changed his game into a defense-only player, and I think that fits well with this team. He had a really good year last year. Jake McCabe is going to be there for a full season, which was a super underrated addition to this team last year. I think he fits in perfectly into their top four. He's going to be a big add to have for the whole year. Timothy Liljegren is still underrated by many. Mark Giordano still has a lot in the tank. If you have that as your bottom pairing, good for you, Maple Leafs, good for you. John Klingberg was an interesting add for me. I don't think he brings anything to the table in his own zone. He is great with the puck, but I don't think he's the type of defenseman that this team needed, especially when you can kind of put Liljegren in that same sort of role and get a better game in their own end. But, whatever. Still a good team. In net, you got Ilya Samsonov, who had a really good year last season, and Joseph Woll, who I'm excited to see what he has in his full first NHL season. I'm a fan of his game. I know I kept it pretty short with the Maple Leafs, but they're a great team. They didn't lose a ton this offseason. I think Kerfoot was an interesting Swiss Army knife that they lost, and then they kind of just traded out some bottom six pieces. And I think overall they're just a faster, more dynamic team than they were last year. It's always yet to be seen how that translates to the playoffs, if they can finally get over. I guess they got over the first hump last year, but that doesn't mean shit to these guys. But yeah, this team's really good. I think they definitely win this Atlantic Division, and I think they have a real case to win the President's Trophy as well. So that's my Atlantic Division kind of preview predictions. Let me know what you guys think. As I said, I think the division as a whole is the best in all of hockey, and I think from kind of 3 to 7, any team can make the playoffs. I really believe that, and I think the Canadiens are going to be pretty feisty, so I'm excited to watch this upcoming season. It's going to be a great year. Let me know what you guys think. See ya.